Well, now we will practice deferred tax expense. That how to calculate this deferred tax expense and what are the accounting entries and how this deferred tax expense is presented in the financial statements. So be ready to understand this scenario in which, like, we have profit before tax of 300,000 for the year 31st December 2020. Depreciation expense for this year that we calculated as per IAS 16 is 10,000. Whereas the tax rules, they allow full amount of asset 50,000 as deductible expense in arriving at taxable profit. Income tax rate is 30%. We have to calculate deferred tax expense for the year ending 31st December 2020, and we have to pass accounting entry to record provision for deferred tax for the year 2020. Step 1, calculate carrying amount of the asset. We know very well that when we calculate deferred tax expense, it is the difference between carrying amount and tax base. Okay, so we have to calculate carrying amount of asset and we have to calculate tax base of asset. Carrying amount of asset, cost minus its accumulated depreciation, which is 10,000, and we get its carrying amount 40,000. Isko calculate karna is quite easy for you. Well, whereas tax base of the asset is again the cost of 50,000 straightforward, and the amount that taxation rules allow to subtract as tax expense, which is 50,000. So इसकी जो net book value हमारे पास आएगी taxation point of view से वो zero होगी. So what we say that carrying amount of the asset is 40,000, which is greater than carrying amount is greater than the tax base. Okay, carrying amount of asset is 40,000, which is greater than its tax base, which was 0. तो हमने एक rule of thumb पढ़ा हुआ है, when carrying amount of asset, we are talking about asset in this scenario, when carrying amount of asset is greater than its tax base, this is known as taxable temporary difference. Okay, well, let's see how to account for this. Now, calculation of temporary difference, this is what like we were discussing in the last slide. The carrying amount is 40,000 and tax base is 0. Taxable temporary difference is 40,000. Here we will calculate the amount of deferred tax expense. Okay, this is deferred tax expense. Calculation of deferred tax expense, taxable temporary difference is 40,000 as we have determined over here. Okay, coming down, and the tax rate is 30,000. We get 12,000 as deferred tax expense. All right. Accounting entry for this deferred tax expense is income tax expense in statement of profit loss would be debited, and provision for deferred tax would be credited, which will be presented in the balance sheet as non-current liability. All right. So what you saw कि income tax expense debit आपका हुआ था जब आपने करंट टैक्स को अकाउंट फॉर किया था, और जब डेफर्ड टैक्स एक्सपेंस को कर रहे हैं तब भी इनकम टैक्स एक्सपेंस ही डेबिट हो रहा है. सो दिस इज व्हाट वी लर्नड कि इनकम टैक्स एक्सपेंस कंप्राइजेस ऑफ टू कंपोनेंट्स, करंट टैक्स एंड डेफर्ड टैक्स. वेल, इसको जब हम स्टेटमेंट ऑफ प्रॉफिट लॉस में शो करेंगे, दिस इज प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स फिगर, करंट टैक्स एंड डेफर्ड टैक्स both would be presented in the statement of profit loss for that year as an expense. तो हमारी ये 90,000 की जो है इनकम टैक्स एक्सपेंस की अमाउंट कैलकुलेट हो रही है, एंड प्रॉफिट आफ्टर टैक्स इज 210,000. Okay, very well. Next we will see that how we present our income tax provisions in the statement of financial position, means balance sheet में. एज वी डिस्कस्ड अर्लियर कि प्रोविजन फॉर डेफर्ड टैक्स जो है वो नॉन करंट लायबिलिटी के तौर पर बैलेंस शीट में प्रेजेंट की जाएगी, एंड प्रोविजन फॉर करंट टैक्स जो है वो करंट लायबिलिटी के तौर पर बैलेंस शीट में प्रेजेंट की जाएगी. बाय डूइंग सो वी आर डन विद द डेफर्ड टैक्स एक्सपेंस एंड its liability, and as well as current tax expense and its liability. So important thing that we must learn over here is when we say deferred tax expense, that is calculated on taxable temporary differences and it gives a deferred tax liability. Okay, और जब हम बात करते हैं deductible temporary difference के, तो it leaves a deferred tax asset amount. Anyways, as far as your syllabus is concerned, okay, for your syllabus we just have deferred tax liability concepts. So I trust that by doing this you will have complete concept of deferred tax liability. Thank you.